You people don't belong in first class, and you know it. The words cut through the busy Miami International Airport terminal like a blade. Brad Morrison stood behind the Skyline Airways premium check-in counter, arms crossed, blocking the red velvet rope like a nightclub bouncer who'd forgotten his place. His polyester uniform stretched tight across his chest. His name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his eyes fixed on the black couple approaching with their sleeping toddler. He had no idea that in exactly 12 minutes, the man he was about to ban would become his boss. The man whose family he was humiliating owned a $4 billion tech empire. And right now, while Brad Morrison played security theater, that same man was one phone call away from buying the entire airline. Before we dive into this story of instant karma and corporate justice, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of how they look, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Stories like this need to be heard. Now let's go back to Gate 7 at Miami International Airport on a humid Thursday morning at 9:30 a.m., where prejudice and power were about to collide in the most expensive way possible. Marcus Rivera pushed the luggage cart through the automatic doors of Terminal 3. The Florida heat hit them like a wall, but inside the air conditioning provided instant relief. He wore a black hoodie soft as silk, but looking ordinary to untrained eyes. His sneakers showed wear from months of travel. His jeans were faded in all the right places. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who'd rolled out of bed to catch a budget flight. The details told a different story. The hoodie was custom Italian cashmere worth more than most monthly salaries. The sneakers were limited edition handmade in France. And hidden beneath his left sleeve, a Vacheron Constantin watch ticked away 37 minutes past 9, its platinum case worth more than most houses. Diana Rivera walked beside him, exhaustion written in every line of her face. She'd just completed a 36-hour shift in the pediatric cardiac unit at Johns Hopkins. Her oversized cardigan hung loose over designer jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun secured with what looked like a basic elastic band, but was actually 18-karat gold. She pushed their 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, in a stroller that appeared ordinary, but cost more than most cars. Behind them, 3 Rimowa trunks sat stacked on the cart. Each piece of luggage contained a month's worth of clothing for their Swiss Alps retreat. Marcus needed the mountains, the silence, and the distance from his tech empire after closing the biggest defense contract in Nexus Technologies' history. The terminal buzzed with holiday chaos. Families dragged oversized bags toward security lines that snaked back and forth like labyrinths. Children cried. Adults shouted into phones. The general boarding area resembled a refugee camp during natural disaster season. But 30 feet away, a different world existed. Red velvet ropes cordoned off a plush crimson carpet leading to 3 dedicated desks. Gold lettering above them read Skyline Airways First Class and Diplomatic Services. While economy passengers waited in lines stretching back 200 yards, the premium lane stood empty except for one person, Brad Morrison. Brad Morrison had worked this terminal for 15 years. He'd started as a baggage handler, worked his way up through customer service, and finally earned his manager stripes 5 years ago. At 48, he considered himself the unofficial sheriff of Terminal 3. He knew every scam, every trick, every angle passengers used to game the airline industry. He stood 6 feet tall in regulation shoes that added an extra inch. His uniform was pressed to military precision despite being 2 sizes too small. The fabric strained across his shoulders and pulled at the buttons over his expanding midsection. His name tag was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the terminal lights like a beacon of authority. Brad had grown up in rural Georgia, son of a factory worker and a seamstress. He'd joined the airline industry hoping to see the world, but never made it past shift manager at a single terminal. 23 years of watching wealthy passengers jet off to destinations he'd never afford had carved deep lines of resentment into his face. He stood guard at the first-class entrance with military posture, hands clasped behind his back, rocking slightly on his heels. His eyes scanned the crowd like a predator hunting for weakness. Oversized bags to charge fees on, confused tourists to redirect to slower lines, people who looked like they didn't belong in premium spaces. When he spotted Marcus and Diana approaching the red carpet, his radar activated. Black family, casual clothes, baby stroller. His mental calculator worked overtime. Economy-class passengers trying to scam their way into first-class treatment. Not on his watch. Behind the first-class counter, Jessica Martinez sorted through boarding passes with nervous energy. At 24, she'd been working for Skyline Airways for 8 months. Fresh out of college with a degree in hospitality management, she'd taken this job hoping to work her way up through the airline industry. So far, she'd learned that customer service meant surviving Brad Morrison's daily power trips. Jessica was small and soft-spoken with kind eyes and a genuine desire to help passengers. Her parents had immigrated from Honduras when she was 5 years old. She understood what it felt like to be judged by appearance, to be dismissed before getting a chance to speak. She watched Brad position himself in front of the premium lane and felt her stomach tighten with familiar dread. Near the gate area, Officer David Thompson leaned against a support pillar radio clipped to his belt, watching the morning crowd flow past. At 51, he'd worked airport security for 12 years. He'd responded to Brad Morrison's calls for backup more times than he could count. False alarms, imaginary threats, passengers whose only crime was looking different than Brad expected. Thompson was tired of it. He was tired of playing enforcer for one man's prejudices. He was tired of apologizing to innocent families after discovering Brad had wasted everyone's time. But Brad was persistent and airport administration backed their airline partners, so Thompson kept responding to calls he knew would likely be meaningless. Riley Park sat cross-legged on the floor near the charging station, phone in hand, scrolling through TikTok while waiting for her flight to Orlando. At 19, she had an instinct for viral content that bordered on supernatural. Her last video had hit 2 million views. She was always watching for the next moment worth capturing. Something in the tension near the first-class counter caught her attention. The manager's aggressive posture, the approaching family with their sleeping child, the mismatch between the family's calm demeanor and the manager's hostile body language. Riley opened her camera app and started recording. At Gate A9, Senator Patricia Hayes reviewed briefing documents for her upcoming committee hearing on transportation equity. At 62, she'd built her political career on being tough on crime and supportive of business interests. She flew first class on every airline expecting VIP treatment as both a senator and a frequent traveler. She'd specifically requested the early flight to avoid crowds and photographers. She had important calls to make during the 5-hour journey to Switzerland, where she'd be attending an economic summit. The last thing she needed was delays or disruptions from incompetent airport staff. Elena Rodriguez stood near the customer service desk, tablet in hand, reviewing morning reports. As regional supervisor for customer experience, she made surprise visits to different terminals throughout the Southeast. Today's visit to Miami was prompted by an uptick in discrimination complaints, specifically naming Terminal 3. Elena had worked in airline customer service for 18 years. She'd seen every type of passenger interaction possible. She'd also seen how unchecked bias from staff could destroy customer loyalty and trigger expensive lawsuits. She positioned herself to observe the first-class counter where several recent complaints had originated. Marcus guided the luggage cart toward the premium check-in area. The red carpet felt soft under their feet after walking across miles of hard terminal flooring. Sophia stirred in her stroller, but didn't wake. Diana adjusted the blanket around their daughter's small frame. "We have reservations," Marcus said quietly to Diana as they approached the counter. "Flight 402 to Zurich. Seats 1A and 1B. Diana nodded, checking her crossbody bag. "Boarding passes are digital. Passports are right here. I just want to get through check-in and find coffee." Industrial strength coffee. Marcus chuckled. After 36 hours in surgery, you've earned it. Let's get this done quickly. They moved toward Jessica's counter, but Brad Morrison stepped directly into their path. He didn't smile. He didn't offer the standard Skyline Airways greeting. He held up one hand palm out in a gesture that was unmistakably aggressive. "Hold it right there, folks," Brad said, his voice carrying across the terminal area. His tone was loud enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. "You're in the wrong section. Economy check-in is rows 1 through 15. Follow the blue signs. This area is reserved for first-class passengers only." Marcus stopped the cart. The wheels squeaked on the polished marble floor. He looked up from his phone where he'd been reviewing final emails from his CFO about the defense contract signing. His expression remained mild. He was used to this routine. It was the tax he paid for existing in spaces while black. "We know where we are," Marcus said calmly. "We're flying first class." Brad let out a sharp laugh that sounded more like a bark. He made a show of looking Marcus and Diana up and down, taking in the hoodie, the joggers, Diana's messy hair, and the basic stroller. He shook his head with theatrical disappointment. "Look, buddy," Brad said, dropping any pretense of customer service professionalism. "I don't have time for games this morning. We have a United States Senator flying out in 20 minutes, and I need this area clear of disruptions. I'm not going to tell you again. Take your cart, turn around, and wait in the general boarding line like everyone else. If you move quickly, you might get your bags checked before the cutoff time." Diana stepped forward, gripping the stroller handle tighter. Exhaustion made her patience thin, but she kept her voice level. "We're not playing games," she said firmly. "We have confirmed reservations. Now please step aside so we can check in. Our daughter needs to get settled, and I need to reach the lounge." Brad's face hardened. He moved closer, invading their personal space in a way designed to intimidate. "I've been working this counter for 15 years, lady. I know what our premium customers look like. They wear business suits. They carry leather briefcases. They don't show up looking like they just finished a pickup basketball game." He gestured dismissively at Marcus's casual attire. "Now I can call security and have you escorted to the back of the economy line, or you can leave voluntarily and save yourself the embarrassment. Stop trying to scam your way into the priority lane. It's pathetic." Marcus took a slow, deep breath. He felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, the ancestral anger of being told he didn't belong. But Marcus was a businessman, a negotiator, a strategist. Getting angry gave the other person power, and Marcus preferred to keep power in his own hands. "My name is Marcus Rivera," he said, maintaining steady eye contact with Brad. "This is my wife, Dr. Diana Rivera. We are confirmed passengers on Flight 402 to Zurich seats 1A and 1B. If you would simply check your passenger manifest or allow us to approach the counter, you would see our reservations clearly listed." Brad rolled his eyes in a gesture so unprofessional it bordered on comedy. "Rivera, sure, whatever you say. Look, I'm not checking any manifest because I don't need to. I'm identifying a security risk. 2 individuals dressed inappropriately attempting to bypass established protocols trying to access a restricted high-value area without proper credentials. That's multiple red flags right there." "Security risk?" Diana asked, incredulous. "I'm wearing a $1,200 cardigan and my husband is a respected businessman. We're traveling with our 3-year-old daughter to a family vacation. What exactly feels threatening to you about that?" "It looks like pajamas," Brad shot back. "And frankly, your aggressive attitude is confirming my suspicions. You're not complying with airline staff instructions. You're arguing with security procedures. That alone is grounds for denial of service." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm going to show you our boarding passes," he said slowly, making sure his movements were visible and non-threatening. "They're right here in the Skyline Airways mobile application. Put the phone away." Brad snapped, his voice rising loud enough to draw stares from passengers throughout the terminal area. I told you to leave this area immediately. You are now trespassing in a restricted zone. I am the senior shift manager, and I am ordering you to vacate these premises right now." "You want us to leave the airport entirely?" Marcus asked, raising his eyebrows. "I want you out of my first-class section," Brad hissed. "Go to the self-service kiosks. Print your economy tickets. Wait in the regular passenger line with everyone else. And if you come back to this area again, I will have airport police issue a lifetime travel ban. Do you understand me? A lifetime ban from flying Skyline Airways." Marcus looked at Diana. They shared a silent communication, the kind of wordless conversation that happens between couples who've been together for 15 years. The look said, "Can you believe this guy?" Diana sighed, leaning down to check on Sophia, who stirred but remained asleep. "Marcus," she whispered, "just call the customer service line. Don't waste energy arguing with him." "No," Marcus said quietly. "I want to see exactly how far he's willing to take this. This is about to become a very educational experience." Marcus turned back to Brad Morrison with the calm confidence of a man who'd built a $4 billion company from nothing. He stood to his full height of 6'3", towering over the airline manager, whose authority suddenly seemed smaller in comparison. "Okay," Brad Marcus said, noting the name tag. "Brad Morrison. You're making a mistake here, a very expensive mistake. I'm asking you one final time to scan our boarding passes and check your passenger manifest. If you refuse, I'm going to have to make a phone call that you really don't want me to make." Brad exploded with laughter, the sound echoing off the terminal's high ceilings. He played to the growing audience of onlookers who'd begun gathering around the scene. "Oh, a phone call. That's perfect. Who are you going to call your boys? You planning to bring some kind of gang down here to intimidate me?" The casual racism hung in the air like toxic smoke. Several passengers gasped audibly. Jessica Martinez, still stationed behind the check-in counter, looked up with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable with her manager's escalating behavior. She opened her mouth to intervene, but Brad shot her a silencing glare that made her step back. "I'm going to call the owner of this airline," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet terminal area. Brad slapped his knee with theatrical amusement. The owner. "Oh, that's rich. You think this is some mom-and-pop operation? Kid Skyline Airways is a publicly traded company owned by institutional investors and a board of directors. There's no single owner you can just call up like you're complaining about pizza delivery." "That's where you're wrong," Brad Marcus said. "But you're about to find out just how wrong." Brad grabbed the radio clip to his belt. He held it up like a weapon, his eyes locked on Marcus with malicious satisfaction. "Security to Terminal 3, Skyline Airways first-class desk," he announced into the device. "I have 2 non-compliant passengers refusing to vacate the premium boarding area. Potential confrontation developing. Requesting immediate backup for passenger removal." He released the button and smiled with cruel triumph. "Game over, Rivera. You're not flying to Zurich today. You're not flying anywhere. You're going to spend the next few hours in a holding cell explaining to federal agents why you thought threatening airline personnel was a good idea." The radio crackled with a response. "Security en route. ETA. 2 minutes." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply unlocked his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and found the number saved under Board Chairman Emergency Line. He looked at Diana with a slight smile. "Well, honey," Marcus said loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear clearly, "looks like we're buying an airline today." "Please don't buy the whole thing," Diana muttered, adjusting Sophia's blanket with practiced ease. "Just buy enough to fire him and get us on our vacation." "We'll see how I feel after this conversation," Marcus replied, pressing the call button. Brad crossed his arms, radiating smug satisfaction. He had no idea that the signal from Marcus's phone was currently bouncing off a communications satellite and connecting directly to the private mobile device of Harrison Clark, chairman of the board for Skyline Airways, a man who'd been desperately trying to convince Marcus to invest in the struggling airline for months. The phone rang twice before a warm, booming voice answered. "Marcus? To what do I owe the pleasure? I thought you were taking that sabbatical you've been talking about. Don't tell me you're calling about quarterly projections while you're supposed to be relaxing. I am taking a sabbatical." "Harrison," Marcus said, his voice conversational and relaxed, creating a stark contrast with the tension crackling through the terminal air. "Or at least I'm trying to. I'm currently standing at one of your check-in counters at Miami International Airport Terminal 3. Brad scoffed loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. He's talking to his voicemail, classic scammer move. He probably recorded that greeting himself. Several passengers pulled out their phones, sensing something viral developing. Riley Park adjusted her angle to capture both Marcus on his call and Brad's increasingly agitated behavior. Her TikTok was already getting comments from viewers asking what was happening. Harrison Marcus continued ignoring Brad's commentary. "Do you remember that acquisition offer you made last month, the one where you said the board was looking for a visionary investor to help steer the company away from the bankruptcy proceedings?" On the other end of the line, Harrison Clark's jovial tone vanished instantly, replaced by sharp business focus. "Of course I remember. We need capital injection, Marcus. We need your tech integration systems. We need your reputation. Are you saying you're finally interested in the deal?" "I'm saying I'm buying it," Marcus said clearly. "Right now. Today. But I have one condition that needs to be implemented immediately." "Name it," Harrison said without hesitation. "Whatever you need. I need full executive override access pushed to your terminal management systems immediately. Specifically, I need my ownership status updated and visible on every manager tablet and computer screen at Miami International Airport. I want my passenger profile reflecting the new corporate structure before we board this flight." "Done," Harrison said instantly. "I'm calling legal and IT right now. Give me 3 minutes to push the ownership transfer and system updates through. Welcome to Skyline Airways, Marcus. You just saved us from Chapter 11 bankruptcy." The line went dead. Marcus slipped his phone back into his hoodie pocket with the same casual motion he'd used to pocket loose change. At that exact moment, Officer David Thompson arrived on foot, having jogged from his position near the security checkpoint. He was flanked by 2 additional officers, all looking weary and annoyed. Thompson had responded to Brad Morrison calls 47 times in the past 18 months. 46 of those calls had been completely baseless. He was betting this would be number 47. "What seems to be the problem here?" Brad Thompson asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else in the terminal. "Officer Thompson, thank God you're here," Brad exclaimed, rushing toward the police like a victim seeking protection. "These 2 individuals are refusing to leave a restricted area despite multiple warnings. I've identified them as a security threat based on their aggressive behavior, their refusal to comply with standard procedures, and their inappropriate appearance for this section of the terminal." Thompson turned to Marcus and Diana, taking in their calm demeanor, their sleeping child, and their overall non-threatening presence. He'd seen this scenario play out dozens of times before. Sir Thompson said to Marcus, his tone respectful but professional, "Do you have tickets for today's flight?" "We do," Marcus replied politely. "We're booked in seats 1A and 1B on Flight 402 to Zurich. But Mr. Morrison here has refused to look at our boarding passes because he doesn't believe we can afford first-class tickets." Thompson sighed deeply. "Brad, did you actually scan their boarding passes?" "I don't need to scan anything," Brad shouted, his face turning red with indignation. "Look at them, Thompson. They're obviously running some kind of scam. The male subject just claimed he's buying the entire airline. He's delusional. He could be mentally unstable." Thompson looked at Marcus with new interest. "Sir, if you could just show me your identification and boarding confirmation, we can clear this situation up quickly." "I'd be happy to," Marcus said, reaching for his phone again. But before I show you anything, I think Mr. Morrison's computer is about to receive some very interesting updates. Don't let him reach for anything." Brad shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. "He could have a weapon. He's been making threatening phone calls." Thompson held up a hand to silence Brad. "Let the man show me his documentation, Brad. Calm down and let me do my job." Marcus opened the Skyline Airways mobile application, but before he could hand his phone to the officer, a strange sound began echoing throughout the terminal area. It was a melodious, chiming sound, not the standard notification beep passengers were used to hearing, but a multi-tone alert that sounded like electronic fanfare. The sound was coming from Jessica Martinez's computer terminal. Then Brad's tablet, which he clutched in his increasingly sweaty hands, began vibrating violently. It emitted the same chiming sequence. Then every computer screen at the first-class check-in counter flickered simultaneously. "What is that noise?" Brad muttered, looking down at his tablet with confusion. "Some kind of system malfunction. This cheap technology is always breaking down." He tapped the screen repeatedly, trying to clear what he assumed was an error message. The screen didn't clear. Instead, a massive notification box expanded across the entire display. It was a critical alert banner, the kind usually reserved for weather emergencies, security threats, or aircraft groundings. "Alert VIP status override in progress. Subject Rivera, Marcus loyalty tier. Updating." Brad frowned, squinting at the screen like it was displaying information in a foreign language. "Rivera. That's your name," he said, looking up at Marcus with growing confusion. "Keep reading," Marcus suggested calmly. The screen refreshed automatically. The loyalty tier field, which typically displayed designations like Gold Platinum or Diamond Elite, began flashing rapidly. It cycled through all the standard customer categories and then settled on a classification Brad had never seen in his 15 years of employment. Loyalty tier, majority shareholder flags, executive override, total clearance, do not disturb. Below that designation, a financial summary appeared. This was a feature Skyline Airways had introduced 6 months earlier to help customer service representatives identify high-value passengers for upgrade opportunities and premium service treatment. Usually it showed estimated annual spending figures like $15,000 or $30,000. On Marcus Rivera's profile, the numbers rolled like a digital slot machine before settling on figures that made Brad's hands start shaking. Net worth $4.2 billion. Verified current holdings Skyline Airways. 51% ownership acquisition date today. The terminal noise seemed to fade away. The crying babies, the departure announcements, the rolling luggage wheels all became background whispers. Brad stared at the numbers on his screen, reading them over and over, hoping they would change or reveal themselves as some kind of elaborate computer error. 4 billion, with a B. 51% ownership. He looked at the passenger photo on the screen. It showed Marcus in a tailored business suit, smiling confidently at some corporate event. He looked back at the man standing in front of him, wearing the casual hoodie and faded jeans. Same face, same eyes, same person. But this person owned the company. This person owned the terminal. This person owned the payroll system that generated Brad's bi-weekly paychecks. Brad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain was trying to process an impossibility. The man he'd been preparing to have arrested was his boss. Not just his supervisor or his manager, but the owner of everything Brad touched during his workday. "Is there a problem?" Brad Marcus asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to compress the air around them. "Officer Thompson asked you a question. Did you scan my boarding pass before calling security?" Officer Thompson leaned over Brad's shoulder to look at the tablet display. He let out a low whistle of amazement. "Holy mother of pearl," he muttered. He looked at Marcus with new respect, straightening his posture and adjusting his uniform. "Mr. Rivera, my sincere apologies, sir. I had no idea who you were. You couldn't have known, Marcus said kindly to the officer. You were doing your job properly, unlike Manager Morrison here. Brad's hands began trembling uncontrollably. The tablet slipped from his sweaty fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the suddenly quiet terminal area. He didn't bend down to pick it up. He just stood there staring at Marcus like he was seeing a ghost. I... Brad stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The arrogance and authority had drained out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Mr. Rivera, the system didn't... It didn't show. The system didn't need to show anything. Diana spoke up, stepping forward with Sophia's stroller. Her voice was calm but edged with steel. You judged us the moment we walked over here. You saw a black man in a hoodie and decided he must be a criminal. You didn't check your passenger list. You didn't verify our reservations. You just assumed we didn't belong. I was following standard protocol. Brad whispered, his voice cracking with desperation. Protocol. Marcus took a step closer. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, forming a rough circle around the scene. Is it protocol to threaten passengers with lifetime bans? Is it protocol to call police on a family with a sleeping child? Or is that just your personal protocol? Brad Marcus reached down and picked up the tablet from the floor. He dusted it off carefully and held it out to Brad with exaggerated courtesy. Take it, he ordered. Brad reached out with a shaking hand and accepted the device like it was radioactive waste. Now Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the terminal area, unlock your system and print our boarding passes. And then Brad, we need to have a serious conversation about your future employment status. Brad fumbled with the tablet passcode, typing it incorrectly twice before his trembling fingers managed to unlock the screen. He tapped the boarding pass printing function with jerky robotic movements. The printer behind Jessica's counter whirred to life with mechanical efficiency. Jessica quickly grabbed the printed passes and hurried around the counter. She approached Marcus and Diana with both hands extended, bowing slightly in a gesture of deep respect. Mr. Rivera, Mrs. Rivera, welcome aboard Skyline Airways, she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth and professionalism. I am so deeply sorry for this delay and any inconvenience you've experienced. Please allow me to personally escort your family to our premium lounge. Thank you, Jessica, Marcus said, accepting the boarding passes with a smile. You've been professional and patient throughout this entire situation. I want you to know that your behavior today will be noted in your employment file. Jessica beamed with relief and gratitude. Then Marcus turned back to Brad, who was staring at his shoes, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Officer Thompson. Marcus said I'd like to file a formal complaint regarding harassment and discrimination. I want this incident documented in your official report. Absolutely, Sir Thompson said, pulling out his notebook and pen. He shot Brad a look that mixed pity with disgust. I'll take your full statement right here. Good, Marcus said. He looked directly at Brad, who flinched under the gaze. Don't go anywhere, Brad. I'm going to get my daughter some milk from the lounge. When I come back, I expect the regional director to be here. I believe you have his contact information. Brad nodded weakly, looking like he was about to be physically ill. Marcus turned to Diana and Sophia, offering his arm with a gentle smile. Shall we go get that coffee you wanted? As they began walking toward the premium lounge, the crowd of passengers spontaneously began applauding. It started with a few slow claps from people who had witnessed the entire confrontation, then spread through the terminal area like a wave. Someone in the back shouted, "Good for you!" Another voice called out, "That's what justice looks like!" But the drama was far from over. As Marcus pushed Sophia's stroller toward the lounge entrance, a man in an expensive Italian suit came running down the concourse, his leather shoes clicking rapidly on the polished floor. He was breathless and visibly panicked, clutching a phone in one hand and a briefcase in the other. This was Peter Viviana, the Southeast Regional Director for Skyline Airways. He'd received an emergency alert on his phone about a major ownership change and a developing situation at Terminal 3. He'd sprinted from his office in the administrative wing, knowing that his career likely depended on how he handled whatever crisis was unfolding. Peter skidded to a halt in front of the check-in counter, his carefully styled hair disheveled and his face flushed with exertion. He was a man who prided himself on control and preparation. His suits were always perfectly pressed, his schedules meticulously planned, and his smile professionally calibrated. But right now, Peter looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time. He ignored Brad entirely, rushing past the frozen manager to extend a trembling hand toward Marcus. Mr. Rivera, I am Peter Viviana, the Southeast Regional Director for Skyline Airways. I was on a conference call with Chairman Clark when the acquisition notification came through our corporate systems. I ran all the way from Terminal 2. He paused, gasping for breath and wiping sweat from his forehead. On behalf of the entire Skyline Airways family, I want to offer our most humble and sincere apologies for whatever has transpired here today. Marcus shook the man's outstretched hand with a firm but brief grip. Mr. Viviana, you look like you need to take better care of your cardiovascular health, especially considering the stress your staff apparently puts you under on a regular basis. Peter paled visibly. He turned slowly to look at Brad Morrison, who was still standing by the counter, holding his tablet like a shield against reality. Brad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat lamps. Morrison. Peter said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. What exactly did you do? Sir, Brad stammered, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. I was following security protocols. They looked suspicious. The casual clothing, the baby stroller, the way they were trying to bypass normal procedures. I thought they were attempting to scam their way into premium services. Suspicious Diana interjected, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. She rocked Sophia's stroller gently to keep their daughter sleeping. We offered to show him our boarding passes multiple times. He refused to look. We offered identification. He refused to check. He threatened to ban us for life and called police because he couldn't believe we could afford our seats. Peter closed his eyes as if physically pained by the stupidity he was hearing. You threatened the new majority shareholder with a lifetime ban? He asked, his voice barely controlled. I didn't know, Brad cried out, his composure finally cracking completely. How could I have possibly known? Look at him. He doesn't look like a shareholder. He looks like a what? Brad Marcus asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Go ahead. Finish that sentence. I own 51% of this company now. I think I'm entitled to hear what your employees really think of their customers. Brad's mouth clamped shut. He realized there was no word he could say that wouldn't dig his professional grave even deeper. Every option was a landmine that would explode in his face. The terminal had grown quieter as more passengers stopped to watch the unfolding drama. Phones were out recording everything. Riley Park had been live streaming the entire confrontation, and her viewer count was climbing rapidly. Comments were flooding in from people around the world who were witnessing corporate justice happening in real time. Just then, the commotion near the terminal entrance intensified. A phalanx of assistants and security personnel swept through the automatic doors, clearing a path through the crowd. In the center of the protective formation walked Senator Patricia Hayes, the very VIP that Brad had been so desperate to impress and accommodate. Senator Hayes was a commanding presence with silver hair, styled to perfection, and a navy blue suit that screamed political authority. She was known for her tough stance on crime and her appreciation for luxury accommodations. She had been a regular first-class passenger on Skyline Airways for over 8 years. Brad's eyes lit up with desperate hope. This was his salvation. He'd served the senator personally dozens of times. They had what he considered a professional relationship built on mutual respect for protocol and proper procedures, or so Brad believed. Senator Hayes. Brad called out, stepping around the check-in counter and waving his arms frantically. Over here, ma'am. I've been trying to keep the first-class lane clear for your arrival, but these people have been causing a disruption. Senator Hayes stopped walking. She looked at Brad with polite confusion, then looked past him. Her expression changed completely when her eyes landed on Marcus. A genuine smile broke across her face, transforming her political mask into something warm and authentic. "Marcus Rivera," she exclaimed, completely bypassing Brad as if he were invisible. "Is that you? I haven't seen you since the Technology Summit in Washington. How wonderful to run into you here." She walked straight to Marcus, extending both hands in greeting. Marcus clasped them warmly, his own expression brightening with recognition. "Senator Hayes." "It's always a pleasure," Marcus said. "I heard about the transportation equity bill you're sponsoring. Congratulations on getting it through committee." "Thank you," she replied, then looked down at the stroller where Sophia was finally beginning to stir. "And this must be your daughter Diana. How are you? I read about your groundbreaking work in pediatric cardiac surgery in the medical journal last month. Incredible research." "Thank you, Senator," Diana said, smiling politely despite her exhaustion. "We're actually trying to get to a much-needed family vacation in Switzerland." Brad stood frozen, his arm still half raised in a wave that no one had acknowledged. His mouth hung open as he watched his supposed ally embrace the very people he'd been trying to have arrested. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis, and he couldn't find solid ground anywhere. Senator Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious, "I wish we could catch up properly, but unfortunately your favorite airline manager here was just in the middle of having my family arrested for the crime of flying while black." Senator Hayes's smile vanished instantly. She turned her steel-gray gaze onto Brad with the intensity of a prosecutor examining a hostile witness. "Morrison," she said, her voice dropping 20 degrees. "What is Mr. Rivera talking about? Senator, I was just—" Brad tried to form words, but his thoughts were scattered like leaves in a hurricane. It was just a safety-first approach, you understand. Just a simple misunderstanding. "He told us we didn't belong in first class," Diana added helpfully. "He said we should go wait in what he called the snake line with the other people. He refused to check our reservations and called us security threats." The senator's face darkened like storm clouds gathering. She wasn't just a politician in that moment. She was a woman whose career depended on public perception and voter approval. Being associated with a racist incident could destroy everything she'd built over 2 decades in office. Morrison, Senator Hayes, said coldly, "I've been flying Skyline Airways for 8 years. Marcus Rivera is one of the most respected technology innovators in this country. His company holds defense contracts worth billions of dollars. If you treated him and his family this way, I can only imagine how you've been treating my constituents who aren't billionaires. I treat every passenger with equal respect." Brad lied desperately, sweat pouring down his neck and staining his uniform collar. "That's not true," a voice called out from the crowd of onlookers. A young woman stepped forward, holding her phone up to record Brad's reaction. "Last week you made me check my carry-on bag because you said it looked too bulky, but you let the white guy behind me pass through with a guitar case twice the size." "Yeah," shouted a man from the back of the crowd. "And you yelled at my elderly mother for walking too slowly through the security area. You told her to hurry up or find another airline." The floodgates opened. Passengers who had been quietly enduring Brad's discriminatory treatment for months suddenly found their voices. The crowd, emboldened by Marcus's successful stand against the institution, began sharing their own experiences of being targeted, humiliated, and mistreated. Suddenly, Brad Morrison wasn't just a racist manager who had made one terrible mistake. He was exposed as a serial abuser of power who had been targeting vulnerable passengers for years. Peter Viviana looked at the growing mob of angry passengers, then at the senator, then at his new billionaire boss. He realized that decisive action was his only chance of survival in his own job. "Morrison," Peter barked. "Give me your identification badge, right now." Brad clutched his chest where his name tag and access cards hung on a retractable cord. "My badge. But Peter, I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in private school. My wife just had surgery. You should have thought about those responsibilities before you decided to profile and humiliate my boss," Peter hissed. "Hand over your credentials immediately. You are suspended pending a formal investigation." "No," Marcus interrupted. Everyone turned to look at him. The crowd, the senator, Peter, even Brad looked confused. "No," Peter asked, uncertain. "Sir, I assure you, we will terminate him immediately." "Oh, I definitely want him fired," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the terminal area. "But not yet. If you fire him right now, he goes home. He hides from the consequences. He plays the victim to his family and friends. He learns nothing from this experience." Marcus took a step toward Brad, who instinctively backed away. "I checked the passenger manifest for Flight 402. Brad, the flight to Zurich is completely sold out. Every seat is occupied except for 2 jump seats in the back galley area reserved for crew members." Brad stared at him, not understanding where this was going. "You're going to work this flight." Marcus continued, his voice quiet, but carrying absolute authority. "You're not going to manage anything. You're not going to supervise anyone. You are going to serve. Specifically, you're going to serve my family. I want to see if you can learn the actual meaning of customer service when the power dynamic is completely reversed." I can't do that," Brad whispered, humiliation burning in his cheeks. It's degrading. More degrading than being threatened with jail time in front of your 3-year-old daughter?" Marcus asked, his eyes hard as granite. "You have exactly 2 choices, Brad. Get on that plane and do whatever job I assign you, or I press formal charges for harassment, discrimination, and defamation. I have the best civil rights attorneys in New York on retainer. I will tie you up in federal court until your great-grandchildren are still paying legal fees." Brad looked around desperately. He looked at Senator Hayes, who turned away. He looked at Peter, who nodded grimly in agreement with Marcus. He looked at Officer Thompson, who just shrugged as if to say, "You made your bed." I'll get my things," Brad whispered, completely defeated. "Don't keep us waiting," Marcus said. "We have a schedule to maintain." As Brad walked away toward the employee locker area, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. The crowd of passengers began applauding again. But this time, it wasn't just appreciation for justice being served. It was recognition that they had witnessed something transformative. A moment when power was used not for revenge, but for education. Not for destruction, but for accountability. The applause continued as Marcus, Diana, and Sophia made their way toward the premium lounge, leaving behind a terminal full of passengers who would never forget what they had seen, and a disgraced manager who was about to learn the hardest lesson of his professional life. The Skyline Airways Premium Lounge was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished marble designed to isolate first-class passengers from the chaos of commercial aviation. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. The air smelled of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the runway where planes moved like massive chess pieces across the tarmac. Marcus settled into a plush armchair, while Diana found a quiet alcove where she could feed Sophia, who had finally awakened from her long nap. After 36 hours in the cardiac surgery unit, Diana needed caffeine more than oxygen, and the lounge's espresso machine promised industrial-strength relief. But Marcus wasn't relaxing. His laptop was open on the marble coffee table, and his fingers moved across the keyboard with the rapid precision of a man accustomed to managing multiple crises simultaneously. The acquisition of Skyline Airways had been an impulse decision triggered by Brad Morrison's discrimination. But now Marcus had to make it work as a business proposition. The numbers were actually encouraging. Skyline Airways was undervalued due to management incompetence and a series of public relations disasters. The stock price was artificially depressed. With proper leadership and the integration of Nexus Technologies' AI systems, the airline could become profitable within 18 months. Are you seriously buying an entire airline because one racist manager couldn't do his job properly? Diana asked, sipping her cappuccino and adjusting Sophia's position on her lap. I was already considering it. Marcus admitted, not looking up from his financial modeling spreadsheet. Harrison Clark has been pitching me for months. The infrastructure is solid. The route network is valuable. They just need capital and competent leadership. Case in point, Brad Morrison. You're really going to make him work our flight? Diana asked, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That seems remarkably Old Testament of you. He needs to understand something fundamental, Marcus said finally, looking up from his screen. He sees people as categories. First class, business class, economy class, garbage. He needs to experience what it feels like to be at the bottom of that hierarchy. Maybe then he'll develop some empathy for the passengers he's been tormenting. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the employee facilities, Brad Morrison was having what could generously be called a complete psychological breakdown. He had stripped off his manager's blazer and squeezed himself into a spare flight attendant vest that Peter Viviana had thrown at him. The uniform was 2 sizes too small, pulling at the seams and making him look like a sausage wrapped too tightly. He stared at himself in the locker room mirror. His face was blotchy and red. His eyes were bloodshot from stress tears. His carefully maintained image of authority had evaporated, leaving behind a middle-aged man in an ill-fitting polyester vest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. But underneath the fear and humiliation, a kernel of rage was hardening in Brad's chest. He can't do this to me, Brad thought, his reflection glaring back from the mirror. I am a senior manager. I run this terminal. I've been here for 15 years. Who does he think he is? Just because he has money doesn't mean he can humiliate me like this. Just because he can buy things doesn't mean he owns me. Brad pulled out his personal phone. He still had administrative access to the Skyline Airways scheduling system. Peter hadn't revoked his credentials yet, probably because he was too busy dealing with the media attention that was already building around the incident. Brad's fingers moved across his phone screen with malicious purpose. He navigated to the seat assignment system for Flight 402. He found the reservations for Rivera Marcus and Rivera Diana in seats 1A and 1B. The premium suites, the best seats on the aircraft, the enclosed private spaces that cost more per ticket than Brad made in 3 months. A vicious smile twisted across Brad's face. He tapped the seat modification screen. He couldn't move them to economy class. The system had automatic protections that prevented VIP passengers from being downgraded without executive authorization. But he could flag their seats as mechanically unsafe. If seats 1A and 1B were marked as having safety issues, FAA regulations required passengers to be moved immediately. If first class was completely full, as it was today, they would have to be bumped to business class or moved to a later flight entirely. Even the owner of the airline couldn't override federal safety regulations. Brad marked both seats as mechanical failure, safety hazard, do not occupy. He added a maintenance note claiming the reclining mechanism had a broken motor that could trap passengers in their seats during an emergency evacuation. He hit the save button and felt a petty rush of vindictive satisfaction. Enjoy the middle seats in business class, Mr. Billionaire Brad muttered to his reflection. You might own the airline, but you don't own the Federal Aviation Administration. He straightened his too-tight vest, splashed cold water on his face, and marched out of the locker room with what remained of his dignity. He still had one card left to play, and he was going to play it with maximum impact. 30 minutes later, boarding announcements began echoing through Terminal 3. Flight 402 to Zurich was preparing for departure. Marcus and Diana approached Gate A7, where a cheerful gate agent named Brenda Williams was processing first-class passengers with professional efficiency. Brad stood behind her, scanning boarding passes with mechanical precision, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Marcus handed his mobile boarding pass to Brenda, who scanned the barcode with practiced ease. The scanner emitted a loud, angry buzzer. A red light flashed on her computer screen like a warning signal. "Oh," Brenda said, frowning at her monitor with genuine confusion. "That's very strange, Mr. Rivera. The system is showing a maintenance hold on your seat assignment. It says here that Seat 1A has a mechanical issue with the reclining mechanism that's been flagged as a safety hazard." Brad kept his head down, but Marcus could see the slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Gotcha," Brad thought with satisfaction. "A safety hazard." Marcus asked, his eyebrows rising with interest. "That's unusual. Our aircraft just arrived from London 2 hours ago. The inbound maintenance report showed all systems functioning normally. I know Sir Brenda said tapping her keyboard to bring up additional information. It looks like this maintenance flag was entered into the system just 10 minutes ago by user..." She paused, reading the screen more carefully. "By user B. Morrison." Brenda slowly turned to look at Brad, who was still pretending to be absorbed in his boarding pass scanning duties. Marcus followed her gaze, studying Brad's carefully neutral expression. "Brad?" Marcus said, his voice deceptively casual. "Did you sabotage my seat assignment?" Brad's head snapped up with theatrical innocence. "No, sir. Absolutely not. I was performing a final safety inspection of the aircraft before passenger boarding. I noticed a loose mechanism in the first-class cabin. I was just following proper safety protocols to protect you and your family. Safety is always our #1 priority at Skyline Airways." "A loose mechanism," Marcus repeated slowly. "That you discovered 10 minutes ago, while you were changing clothes in the employee locker room, from 3 floors below the departure gate. I had reports from the cleaning crew." Brad lied, digging himself deeper into an obvious falsehood. "They mentioned hearing unusual noises from the seat motors. I was simply exercising an abundance of caution." Marcus sighed with the weariness of a man who had dealt with corporate sabotage before. He turned back to Brenda with a patient smile. "Brenda, please override the maintenance hold. The seats are functioning perfectly." "I'm sorry, Mr. Rivera," Brenda said apologetically, genuine regret in her voice. "Once a safety flag is entered into the FAA compliance system, I can't remove it without a certified mechanic's signature. It could take up to an hour to get someone out here to inspect the seats. We'd miss our departure slot and have to wait for the next available takeoff time." Brad's internal satisfaction was growing into barely contained triumph. He had successfully delayed the flight. He had inconvenienced the billionaire who thought he could humiliate working-class people without consequences. It was a small victory, but it tasted remarkably sweet. "Well," Brad said, feigning professional concern while inside he was celebrating, "it looks like we might need to reschedule your travel plans, Mr. Rivera. However, I believe we do have 2 middle seats available in business class. Row 22 near the lavatory area. It's not first-class luxury, but it would get you to your destination today." Marcus looked at Brad with the expression of a chess master who had just realized his opponent was about to make a fatal mistake. "You really have no idea who you're dealing with, do you, Brad?" Marcus pulled out his phone again, but this time he didn't call Chairman Harrison Clark. He opened a specialized application that controlled the Obsidian monitoring systems. This was the AI-powered infrastructure management software that his company had developed for defense contractors and which Skyline Airways used throughout their fleet maintenance operations. "I built the software system that you just used to lie to me," Brad Marcus said, his fingers moving across his phone screen with practiced efficiency. "I am accessing the seat sensors in real time directly from the aircraft's diagnostic systems." Marcus turned his phone screen toward Brenda so she could see the live data streaming from Flight 402. "Look here, Brenda. Seats 1A and 1B are fully operational. Pressure sensors normal, motor voltage normal, reclining mechanism tested and verified. No mechanical issues detected." "I can see that clearly," Brenda said, amazement in her voice. "The seats are perfectly fine." Now Marcus continued, his fingers still moving across the touchscreen. "I'm going to access the user modification logs to see exactly when and where this false maintenance report was filed." The phone screen displayed a detailed audit trail showing every interaction with the seat assignment system. Timestamps, location data, user credentials, everything. "Here we are," Marcus said, turning the screen so both Brenda and the growing crowd of passengers could see the evidence. "Manual entry by B. Morrison at 10:14 a.m. Location employee facilities, sublevel 2. The exact time you were changing into your flight attendant vest, Brad." Marcus looked up at Brad, whose face had gone completely white. "You filed a false safety report from the locker room bathroom, Brad. That is a federal offense, falsifying aircraft maintenance records, interfering with flight operations. I could have you arrested right here and now." Brad's knees buckled slightly. The weight of what he had done was settling on him like a collapsing building. "Please," he whimpered, his voice barely audible. "Please, don't call the police. I was just trying to make a point. I didn't mean any harm." "Then fix it," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Not in the computer system. I've already cleared that myself. I mean, fix the situation you've created. You are going to personally escort my family to our seats. You are going to stow our luggage in the overhead compartments. You are going to apologize to my wife for wasting her time and traumatizing our daughter. And if you make one more mistake, one more pathetic attempt at sabotage, I will have you removed from this aircraft in federal custody. If necessary, I will divert the plane to Iceland and have you arrested by international authorities." Brad nodded rapidly, tears of humiliation pricking at his eyes. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." "Whatever you need, sir." He reached for Marcus's expensive Rimowa carry-on bag and immediately struggled with its weight. The bag contained Diana's medical textbooks and Marcus's laptop equipment. Brad's face turned red with exertion as he tried to lift it without showing weakness. The polyester vest strained across his shoulders, threatening to split at the seams. "After you, Mr. Morrison," Diana said graciously, gesturing toward the jet bridge entrance. She was enjoying this reversal more than she cared to admit. Brad trudged down the boarding tunnel, the heavy luggage banging against his shins with every step, leading the family he had tried to destroy toward the luxury cabin he had attempted to deny them. With each painful step, he was learning a lesson about power privilege and the consequences of judging people by their appearance rather than their character. Flight 402 was an Airbus A350 representing the pinnacle of modern aviation engineering. The first-class cabin was a masterpiece of luxury design featuring 8 private suites with sliding doors, lie-flat beds, and personal entertainment systems. The seats were upholstered in Italian leather the color of warm honey. The walls were paneled with real wood veneer that had been sustainably harvested from Swiss forests. Marcus and Diana settled into seats 1A and 1B while Brad struggled with their luggage. His face flushed with exertion and embarrassment. His hands shook so badly that he nearly dropped Diana's bag onto the cabin floor. "Careful," Marcus warned, not looking up from the wine menu he was reviewing. "That bag contains surgical instruments worth more than your annual salary. If you break anything that's another $20,000, you'll owe me personally." "Sorry," Sorry. Brad muttered, his voice hoarse with stress and humiliation. The real flight attendants, the professional crew members who had trained for months to provide world-class service, watched this scene with wide eyes and barely concealed amazement. Maria Santos, the senior purser, had been briefed by Captain Rodriguez about the unusual passenger situation, but seeing it unfold in person was surreal. Maria approached Marcus as Brad continued fumbling with the overhead luggage compartments. "Mr. Rivera, welcome aboard our aircraft. Captain Rodriguez asked me to extend his personal welcome and to inform you that our flight time to Zurich will be approximately 7 hours and 15 minutes. Is there anything specific you need to make your journey comfortable?" "Thank you," Maria Marcus said warmly. "Actually, yes. I'd like to hold a brief staff meeting before we begin our taxi procedures. Since I now own this airline, I figure I should meet the people who make it function properly." "Of course," Sir Maria said with genuine enthusiasm. "I'll gather the entire crew in the front galley area." And Maria Marcus added, "Make sure Brad participates in the meeting. I want him to understand how real customer service professionals conduct themselves." 5 minutes later, the complete flight crew of 12 assembled in the spacious first-class galley. They looked nervous but curious, unsure what to expect from their new billionaire boss, who looked more like a tech startup founder than a traditional airline executive. Brad stood at the back of the group, trying to make himself invisible. "Hi, everyone," Marcus said, his voice warm and approachable. "I know this is an unusual situation. My name is Marcus. This is my wife, Diana. We're not here to make your jobs more difficult or to micromanage your professional expertise. In fact, I bought this airline because I believe the frontline staff like yourselves are its most valuable asset." The crew exchanged glances of surprise and cautious optimism. "I want you all to know that effective immediately, we are implementing a 15% salary increase for all cabin crew members," Marcus continued. The announcement was met with gasps of shock and expressions of pure joy. One flight attendant covered her mouth with both hands. "You work incredibly hard," Marcus said. "You deal with flight delays, turbulence, difficult passengers, and emergency situations. You deserve to be compensated fairly for the critical work you do to keep people safe and comfortable." Several crew members were now smiling broadly, their nervousness replaced by genuine excitement about working for an owner who actually valued their contributions. However, Marcus continued, his tone becoming more serious. "We are also implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. If I hear reports of any employee judging passengers based on their appearance, their accent, their nationality, or any other personal characteristic, that employee will be terminated before we reach our destination." "Is that completely clear?" "Yes, sir," the crew responded in unison, their voices strong and confident. "Excellent," Marcus said. "Now Brad here is going to be observing our service procedures today. He's expressed interest in learning customer service from the ground level up. Maria, I want you to supervise his training personally. If he tries to hide in the galley or avoid his responsibilities, please let me know immediately." Maria's eyes sparkled with barely contained amusement. She had clashed with Brad Morrison multiple times over his unreasonable scheduling demands and his tendency to treat flight crews like personal servants. "With pleasure, Mr. Rivera." "All right, everyone," Marcus concluded. "Let's get to Zurich safely and professionally." The meeting dispersed, with crew members returning to their stations, buzzing with excitement about the salary increases and the new management philosophy. They were already impressed with their new owner's approach to leadership. Brad remained standing alone with Maria, who was holding a tray of hot towels that needed to be distributed to first-class passengers. "Here," Maria said, shoving the tray into Brad's reluctant hands. "Mr. Rivera's family needs these refresher towels. Make sure they're warm, but not scalding. And Brad," she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, "make sure you smile when you serve them. Customer service is about attitude, not just actions." Brad stared down at the towels like they were instruments of torture. He had been a manager for 5 years. He had an office. He had staff meetings. He had authority. Now he was reduced to being a towel distributor, and the irony was not lost on him. He walked slowly into the main cabin where Marcus was reclined in his leather seat watching a movie on his personal entertainment screen. Diana was reading a medical journal while Sophia played quietly with a small stuffed animal. "Hot towel, Sir Brad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus paused his movie and looked at the towel Brad was offering. Then he looked directly into Brad's eyes for several long seconds. "Thank you, Brad," he said politely, accepting the towel with a gracious nod. "That's very professional of you." "Oh," and Brad Marcus added as the defeated manager started to walk away, "I need you to do something else for me." "Yes, sir," Brad responded automatically. "My daughter is going to need her diaper changed during the flight." The changing table in the first-class lavatory can be tricky to set up properly. "My wife is exhausted from her hospital shift. I'd like you to prepare the changing area, sanitize the surfaces, and stand by to assist with waste disposal." Brad's stomach lurched with revulsion. "Assist with waste disposal." "Yes," Marcus said, his eyes twinkling with stern amusement. "I wouldn't want to get my hands dirty. After all, I'm just a shareholder." Brad swallowed hard, tasting bile in the back of his throat. "Right away, sir." As Brad walked toward the lavatory to begin what was arguably the most humiliating task of his professional career, the aircraft began its pushback from the gate. The Pratt & Whitney engines spooled up with a deep, powerful roar that could be felt through the cabin floor. Brad was now trapped in a metal cylinder at 40,000 feet with the man he had tried to destroy, and the flight to Zurich was just beginning. But the real consequences of his actions were only starting to unfold. As the Airbus A350 climbed to cruising altitude above the Atlantic Ocean, a notification appeared on the aircraft's Wi-Fi system. It was an email broadcast to all Skyline Airways employees worldwide sent from the corporate headquarters in Atlanta. The subject line read, "Management Restructuring and Compliance Audit. Immediate Implementation." The sender was listed as Marcus Rivera, Chief Executive Officer. Brad's personal phone, tucked into his vest pocket, buzzed with the notification. He pulled it out in the aircraft galley, knowing he should be focusing on his service duties, but unable to resist checking what new corporate policies were being implemented. He opened the email and began reading. His eyes widened with each sentence. It wasn't just a management restructuring announcement. It was a comprehensive forensic audit of all manager-level activities for the previous 5 years. Expense reports, cash handling procedures, customer service complaints, personnel decisions. Brad's hands started shaking as the implications sank in. He had been skimming cash from oversized baggage fees for 3 years, calling it his performance bonus. He'd been pocketing money from confused elderly passengers who didn't understand credit card processing. He'd been charging cash for non-existent services and fees. It had never been a large amount, maybe $50 here, $100 there. Over 3 years, it totaled approximately $42,000. He'd convinced himself it was harmless, that the airline wouldn't miss such small amounts, that he deserved extra compensation for dealing with difficult passengers. But Marcus Rivera was a technology mogul whose company specialized in data forensics and financial crime detection. If anyone could uncover a pattern of petty theft, it was the man who had just bought the airline specifically to investigate discrimination and misconduct. Brad dropped his phone. The device clattered onto the galley floor, the sound echoing in the small space. He looked out through the small porthole at the dark Atlantic Ocean, stretching endlessly in all directions, and realized with a cold shock of terror that when this aircraft landed in Switzerland, losing his job would be the least of his problems. He wasn't just serving a billionaire who had humiliated him. He was serving the man who was about to send him to federal prison. The first-class cabin of Flight 402 was dimmed to a soothing twilight blue as the aircraft cruised at 41,000 feet above the dark Atlantic. Most passengers had settled into their evening routines, some sleeping, others watching movies on their personal screens. The gentle hum of the Pratt and Whitney engines provided a rhythmic backdrop to the luxury cabin's peaceful atmosphere. Marcus remained awake, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face as he reviewed the preliminary forensic data his team in New York had compiled and transmitted via the aircraft's high-speed internet connection. The results were even worse than he had expected. Brad Morrison wasn't just a racist manager who had made one terrible mistake. He was part of a network of discrimination that had been operating for years while simultaneously stealing money from the company. In the cramped galley area, Brad paced like a caged animal. The email about the comprehensive audit was burning a hole in his consciousness. 3 years of petty theft documented in financial records he had assumed no one would ever examine. $42,000 in skimmed cash from passengers he had specifically targeted because they seemed unlikely to complain or follow up. He had convinced himself it was victimless crime. The airline was a massive corporation that wouldn't miss small amounts of cash. The passengers were getting their flights, so what difference did an extra $20 or $30 make? He had rationalized it as compensation for dealing with the stress of managing difficult travelers. But now Marcus Rivera owned those financial records. Marcus Rivera, whose company built fraud detection systems for the Department of Defense. Marcus Rivera, who had the resources to conduct forensic audits that could trace every stolen dollar back to its source. Brad needed to get ahead of this disaster. He needed to confess and beg for mercy before the investigation uncovered everything. Maybe if he showed remorse, maybe if he offered to pay everything back with interest, he could avoid criminal charges. He smoothed his too-tight vest, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and walked quietly through the darkened cabin toward seat 1A. Marcus was typing on his laptop, reviewing what appeared to be financial spreadsheets and data visualization charts. Mr. Rivera, Brad whispered, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing other sleeping passengers. "I didn't ring the call button, Brad," Marcus replied without looking up from his screen. "I know, sir. I saw the email about the audit, the corporate restructuring investigation." Brad knelt beside the seat, lowering himself into a submissive posture that he had forced countless customers to adopt when they begged him to waive fees or change policies. "Please, sir, I need to speak with you about something important," Marcus said, finally turning to look at Brad with mild interest. "The audit. Are you concerned about something specific, Brad?" "Sir, I wanted to be completely honest with you," Brad stammered, his voice trembling with desperation. "There might be some minor irregularities in my expense reports and cash handling over the past few years. Sometimes when the credit card systems were down, I had to process payments manually and the paperwork could get confusing. I just didn't want you to think there was any intentional wrongdoing." Marcus held up a hand to stop Brad's rambling confession. He turned his laptop screen toward the kneeling manager. "Brad, please stop insulting my intelligence," Marcus said quietly. "You're embarrassing yourself and wasting my time." Brad looked at the screen. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a sophisticated data visualization from Obsidian Systems' fraud detection software showing a pattern of red dots and financial anomalies associated with Brad's employee identification number. "My company builds financial crime detection systems for federal law enforcement agencies," Marcus explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "It took my artificial intelligence algorithms exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds to identify your theft pattern. You targeted elderly passengers and racial minorities, charged them cash for fabricated fees, then manually adjusted their records afterward to hide the transactions." Marcus pointed to specific data points on the screen. "You stole $42,367 over 34 months. You specifically targeted people you assumed wouldn't complain or follow up. Grandmother traveling alone to visit family. Recent immigrants with limited English. Young parents afraid of missing flights. People you thought were powerless." Brad felt all the blood drain from his head. He gripped the leather armrest to keep from collapsing onto the cabin floor. "I can pay it all back," he whispered desperately. "I have savings. I can get a second mortgage. Please, Mr. Rivera, I have a family. I have 2 teenagers who are supposed to start college next year." "So did the grandmother you extorted last month," Marcus said coldly. "So did the young father you threatened with a missed flight unless he paid your fabricated oversized baggage fee. So did the elderly couple you charged 3 times for a service that should have been free." "I'll do anything," Brad pleaded, tears streaming down his face and staining his polyester vest. "I'll resign immediately. I'll walk away from the airline industry completely. Just please don't involve the police. I'm begging you." Marcus looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You still don't understand, do you? If you had simply done your job professionally today, if you had treated my family with basic human dignity, you might have gotten away with your theft for another 10 years. I wouldn't have bought this airline. I wouldn't have looked at the financial records. I wouldn't have conducted a forensic audit." Marcus leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Your racism was the flare that revealed your location, Brad. Your prejudice was the spotlight that illuminated your corruption. You destroyed yourself. I'm just the witness to your self-destruction." The aircraft suddenly jolted with unexpected turbulence, a sharp drop in altitude that threw Brad against the cabin wall. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on with an urgent electronic tone. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom system with calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected clear air turbulence over the Atlantic. All cabin crew and passengers, please take your seats immediately and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. We should be through this rough air in approximately 10 minutes. "Sit down," Brad Marcus ordered, pointing toward an empty crew jump seat near the cockpit door. "Buckle yourself in and stay there. We're not finished with our conversation." Brad stumbled toward the jump seat, strapping himself in with shaking hands. He sat facing the cabin, forced to look out at the sleeping passengers, the people he had viewed as sources of revenue for so long. Now he was the one being transported toward judgment, powerless to control his destination. For the next 90 minutes, as the aircraft pushed through intermittent turbulence above the dark ocean, Brad sat in terrified silence. Every shake of the plane felt like an omen. Every announcement from the cockpit sounded like a countdown to his destruction. He realized that the luxury and comfort he had coveted, the power he had abused, was gone forever. When the wheels touched Swiss soil, his life as he knew it would be over. The descent into Zurich began as the sun rose over the snow-capped Alps, painting the sky in brilliant shades of violet and gold. It was a beautiful morning for everyone aboard Flight 402, except Brad Morrison, who watched the approaching mountains like a condemned man watching his executioner sharpen an axe. As the Airbus touched down smoothly on runway 16 at Zurich Airport, Maria's voice came over the cabin intercom system with professional warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Zurich, Switzerland. On behalf of Captain Rodriguez, the entire flight crew, and our new owner, Mr. Marcus Rivera, we thank you for flying Skyline Airways. We hope you have a wonderful stay in Switzerland." The passengers applauded spontaneously, a rare occurrence in commercial aviation. They knew something significant had happened during their flight, something that went beyond normal travel experiences. Many had witnessed the confrontation at Miami International Airport through social media posts and live streams. They felt like they had been part of a moment of corporate justice. Marcus stood and stretched, looking refreshed despite the overnight flight. Diana woke Sophia, who was giggling and energetic after sleeping peacefully for most of the journey. They looked like a normal family, completing a routine international trip. Brad unbuckled his jump seat harness, his movements stiff and mechanical. He moved toward the main cabin door to perform the standard arrival duties, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the door controls. He hoped desperately that he could somehow slip away in the confusion of passenger deplaning, blend into the crowd at the terminal, find a train, and disappear forever. But as the door opened and the jet bridge extended to meet the aircraft, the first people to step aboard were not ground crew or customs officials. Two officers in the distinctive blue uniforms of the Zurich Canton Police stepped into the cabin, followed by a man in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. Brad froze completely. He tried to back away into the galley area, but he bumped into a service cart and found himself trapped with nowhere to run. Mr. Gregory Morrison, the lead officer, asked, his English accented but precise. Brad's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He managed a weak nod of confirmation. "We have been contacted by the legal department of Skyline Airways regarding urgent matters of corporate theft and financial fraud," the officer continued formally. "We also have a request from the United States Department of Justice for your detention pending extradition procedures. You are under arrest." The officer stepped forward and removed a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click of the restraints locking around Brad's wrists echoed through the silent cabin like a funeral bell tolling. Marcus and Diana approached from their seats, Marcus carrying Sophia in one arm and their carry-on luggage in the other. He nodded respectfully to the police officers. "Officer Brunner, thank you for your prompt response to our request," Marcus said. "Of course," Herr Rivera, the lead officer, replied with professional courtesy. "Swiss authorities take financial crimes very seriously, particularly when they involve international transportation systems." Brad looked at Marcus with eyes wide with shock and betrayal. You called them during the flight." "High-altitude Wi-Fi is a wonderful innovation," Brad Marcus said calmly. "I filed the criminal complaint, provided the forensic evidence, and requested your detention while we were somewhere over the mid-Atlantic. International law enforcement cooperation is remarkably efficient when the evidence is clear and comprehensive." Marcus leaned close to Brad so only he could hear the final words. "You tried to ban me from an airplane because of the color of my skin and the clothes I was wearing. Now you're going to a place where everyone wears exactly the same outfit. I hope the irony isn't lost on you." The officers escorted Brad off the aircraft, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head bowed in complete defeat. He walked past the passengers he had served during the flight, people who watched his arrest with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Marcus turned to Maria and the flight crew who had been watching the arrest in stunned amazement. Maria Marcus said warmly, "You handled this entire flight with extraordinary professionalism. As of today, I'm promoting you to station manager for Miami International Airport. I need someone in that position who understands what genuine customer service looks like." Maria gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. "Mr. Rivera, Thank you so much. I won't disappoint you." "I know you won't." Marcus smiled. "And Jessica Martinez, the gate agent who helped us in Miami despite Brad's interference, make her your assistant manager. She showed courage when it would have been easier to stay silent." "It will be my pleasure, sir," Maria said, beaming with excitement about her new responsibilities. Marcus, Diana, and Sophia walked off the aircraft and through the jet bridge into Zurich's pristine terminal. They cleared Swiss customs efficiently, greeted by airport officials who were eager to accommodate the new aviation industry leader who had just made international headlines. As they stepped outside the terminal into the crisp alpine air, a black Mercedes sedan was waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door and helped them load their luggage for the journey to their mountain resort. Diana looked back toward the airport terminal where Brad Morrison was probably being processed by immigration authorities before his transfer to a detention facility. "You know," she said, adjusting her scarf against the cool mountain air, "that was quite an expensive plane ticket." Marcus laughed, helping Sophia into her car seat. "We got an airline, we got justice for Brad's victims, and we got a vacation in the Swiss Alps. Plus, the stock price jumped 18% since news of the acquisition and management cleanup hit the financial markets. I'd say it was actually a bargain." Besides, Marcus added, settling into the leather seat as their driver pulled away from the terminal, "I just made back the entire purchase price in stock appreciation. Sometimes doing the right thing is also good business. The Mercedes moved smoothly through Zurich's efficient traffic patterns, carrying the Rivera family toward their mountain retreat, while behind them, the consequences of Brad Morrison's racism and corruption continued to unfold across 2 continents. Within hours, the story would be trending on social media platforms worldwide. Within days, it would trigger congressional hearings on discrimination in transportation. Within weeks, it would become a case study in business schools about corporate accountability and leadership. But for now, it was simply a story about a man who judged people by their appearance and learned that assumptions can be the most expensive mistakes you ever make. The Swiss detention facility where Brad Morrison spent his first night in custody was clean, efficient, and deeply humiliating for a man who had spent 15 years wielding petty authority over airline passengers. His cell was small, but sanitary, with a narrow window that offered a view of the Alps he would never visit as a tourist. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles away in the Nexus Technologies headquarters in Atlanta, Marcus's forensic accounting team was conducting a digital autopsy of Skyline Airways customer service records. What they discovered was far worse than a single racist manager stealing baggage fees. It was a pattern of institutional bias that had been operating for years under the radar of corporate oversight. Dr. Sarah Kim Marcus's chief data analyst was pulling an all-nighter to prepare her preliminary report. Her team had been granted complete access to Skyline Airways' internal systems, and the artificial intelligence algorithms were processing 5 years of customer complaints, employee records, and financial transactions. The patterns emerging from the data were disturbing and clear. Brad Morrison wasn't operating in isolation. He was part of a network of managers across multiple airports who had been targeting minority passengers for additional fees, upgraded security screenings, and service denials. Sarah's phone rang at 3 a.m. Atlanta time. Marcus was calling from his Swiss hotel suite where it was 9 a.m. local time. "Sarah, I know it's early, but I need your preliminary findings," Marcus said. "The media attention is building, and I want to get ahead of this story before it becomes just another corporate scandal that disappears after a few news cycles." "Marcus, this is bigger than we thought," Sarah replied, pulling up her data visualization screens. "Brad Morrison was just the tip of the iceberg. We've identified discrimination patterns at 14 different airports. The AI has flagged over 12,000 individual incidents where passengers were targeted based on racial profiling algorithms." 12,000, Marcus repeated, sitting up straighter in his hotel room chair. "The system was designed to appear random," Sarah explained. "Managers were given discretion to apply additional security measures and fees, but the discretion was being exercised almost exclusively against minority passengers. African American families were 3 times more likely to be charged oversized baggage fees. Hispanic passengers were 4 times more likely to be subjected to additional identification requirements. Asian passengers were regularly questioned about business class upgrades they had legitimately purchased." Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. This wasn't just Brad Morrison's personal racism. This was corporate policy disguised as individual bias. "Sarah, I want you to expand the investigation," Marcus said. "Contact every passenger who was targeted over the past 5 years. Offer them full refunds, compensation for their inconvenience, and free flights to their choice of destinations. Set up a victim compensation fund with $10 million initial funding." "That's very generous, Marcus," Sarah said. "Are you sure about the scope?" "I'm sure about the principle," Marcus replied. "People who were humiliated and stolen from deserve more than apologies. They deserve justice that comes with a check attached." While Marcus was authorizing victim compensation from his Swiss hotel, social media was exploding with passenger testimonials. Riley Park's original TikTok video from Miami International Airport had reached 15 million views and was still climbing. The hashtag Skyline Shame was trending globally, and people were sharing their own experiences of airline discrimination using Brad Morrison treatment. Maria Santos, a teacher from Phoenix, posted a video explaining how Brad Morrison had forced her to miss her father's funeral by claiming her bereavement discount was fraudulent. James Wright, an engineer from Detroit, shared security camera footage of Brad calling police on his teenage son for sitting in the wrong waiting area. Mrs. Jennifer Park from Los Angeles uploaded a recording of Brad humiliating her elderly mother for walking too slowly through the boarding process. The stories kept coming. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Each one documented a pattern of abuse that had been dismissed as isolated incidents, but was now revealed as targeted discrimination. Senator Patricia Hayes, who had witnessed the confrontation at Miami International Airport, was fielding calls from her congressional colleagues about organizing hearings on transportation discrimination. The political implications were significant. Airlines fell under federal regulation, and documented civil rights violations could trigger major legislative changes. But the most damaging revelations were still emerging from the data analysis. Sarah Kim's team had discovered internal training materials that explicitly instructed managers on how to identify high-risk passengers using coded language that was unmistakably racial profiling. Training documents referred to urban fashion choices and non-traditional family structures as indicators of potential security risks. Managers were encouraged to apply enhanced scrutiny to passengers who displayed cultural signifiers that might indicate non-compliance with premium service standards. The language was carefully crafted to avoid explicitly mentioning race, but the intent was crystal clear to anyone who understood the coded terminology of institutional discrimination. Elena Rodriguez, the customer service supervisor who had witnessed the Miami airport confrontation, was now working directly with the federal investigation. She had been quietly documenting discriminatory policies for months, waiting for an opportunity to expose them safely without risking her own career. Elena had recordings of manager training sessions where supervisors explicitly discussed strategies for discouraging minority passengers from using premium services. She had email chains showing corporate executives celebrating reduced complaint rates without realizing that the reduction came from victims who had given up on reporting bias rather than from improved service. The most damning evidence came from internal corporate communications discussing customer demographics and revenue optimization. Executives had been analyzing passenger data to identify which customer segments were least likely to complain about poor service, then targeting those groups for additional fees and reduced amenities. It was a business model built on exploitation of vulnerable populations, disguised as customer service protocol and revenue management. Marcus received Sarah's complete preliminary report while sitting in his hotel restaurant, enjoying breakfast with Diana and Sophia. The Swiss Alps were visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, their snow-covered peaks gleaming in the morning sunlight. It should have been a peaceful family moment, but the contents of the report made Marcus's coffee taste bitter. Diana, reading over his shoulder as he scrolled through the data, shook her head with disgust. "This isn't just individual racism," she said quietly. "This is corporate strategy. They weaponized bias to increase profits. The Victim Compensation Fund is going to cost us more than I initially projected," Marcus said. "We're looking at potentially $50 million in settlements, legal fees, and structure overhauls." Diana looked at him with the expression she used when examining a patient's heart condition that required major surgery. "Sometimes you have to spend money to save a life," she said. "In this case, you're saving the life of corporate accountability in an entire industry." Marcus nodded, making mental calculations about the financial and reputational investment he was about to make. $50 million would barely dent his personal wealth, but it would send a message to every airline, hotel, and service company in America that discrimination had become expensive. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from Harrison Clark, the chairman of Skyline Airways' board of directors. Marcus Harrison said, his voice tight with stress. "We have a problem. The media attention is getting out of control. Stock prices are fluctuating wildly. Our insurance company is asking questions about liability coverage. The Department of Transportation is opening a formal investigation." Harrison Marcus said calmly, cutting through the panic, "This isn't a public relations problem. This is a documented civil rights violation that we're going to fix completely and permanently. The media attention is deserved, and the government investigation is necessary." "But the cost," Harrison protested. "The settlements, the legal fees, the structure changes. We're talking about potentially hundreds of millions of dollars." "The cost of doing nothing would have been higher," Marcus replied. "We would have faced class action lawsuits, federal sanctions, and criminal charges for corporate executives. We would have lost our operating licenses and faced bankruptcy within 18 months. Harrison was quiet for a moment, processing the financial reality. "You're saying this scandal actually saved the company?" "I'm saying that Brad Morrison's racism exposed a cancer that was going to kill Skyline Airways anyway," Marcus explained. "We're just choosing to perform surgery instead of letting the patient die slowly from institutional disease." "What do you need from me?" Harrison asked, his tone shifting from panic to determination. "Complete cooperation with the federal investigation," Marcus said. "Full disclosure of all internal documents. Immediate termination of any employee involved in discriminatory practices. And most importantly, I want you to testify before Congress about how this bias developed and what we're doing to prevent it from ever happening again." "You want me to testify against my own company?" Harrison asked. "I want you to testify for civil rights and corporate accountability," Marcus corrected. "The company that allowed this discrimination to flourish doesn't exist anymore. We're building something better." While Marcus was coordinating the corporate response from Switzerland, Brad Morrison was sitting in a Swiss jail cell, finally understanding the full scope of his professional destruction. His court-appointed attorney had explained the extradition process and the federal charges waiting for him in the United States: theft of federal transportation funds, civil rights violations under federal law, conspiracy to defraud interstate commerce, wire fraud for manipulating computer systems. The charges carried potential prison sentences totaling 15 to 20 years. But the legal consequences were only the beginning of Brad's problems. His wife had already filed for divorce, citing the public humiliation and financial liability. His mortgage company had initiated foreclosure proceedings on their home. His children were facing harassment at school from classmates who had seen the viral videos of his arrest. The airline industry was small and gossipy. Word of Brad's conviction would spread throughout the employment network, making him unemployable in any transportation-related job. At 48 years old, with a federal criminal record and no transferable skills outside airport management, his career options had dwindled to minimum-wage service jobs. But perhaps most painful of all, Brad was beginning to understand the human cost of his actions. His attorney had shown him some of the victim impact statements that would be read during his sentencing hearing. Elderly passengers who had been afraid to travel after being humiliated by him. Young parents who had struggled to afford vacation flights but been forced to pay his fraudulent fees. Families who had missed weddings, graduations, and funerals because of his discriminatory delays and denials. For the first time in his adult life, Brad Morrison was forced to see his victims as human beings rather than revenue opportunities. The weight of that recognition was crushing his remaining self-respect like a boulder rolling downhill. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the Skyline Airways scandal were spreading throughout the travel industry like a contagion of accountability. Other airlines were quietly reviewing their customer service protocols and discrimination complaint procedures. Hotel chains were auditing their check-in policies. Car rental companies were examining their customer profiling systems. Marcus had accidentally triggered a nationwide examination of bias in customer service, and corporate executives everywhere were realizing that their industry's casual discrimination had become a liability they could no longer afford. The Federal Aviation Administration announced new regulations requiring airlines to maintain detailed records of customer service complaints and fee assessments, with mandatory reporting of demographic patterns that might indicate discriminatory practices. The Department of Justice established a new task force focused on civil rights violations in transportation industries. Congressional hearings were scheduled for the following month, with Marcus Rivera and other industry leaders called to testify about discrimination in commercial aviation. Civil rights organizations were preparing class action lawsuits against multiple airlines. Consumer protection agencies were launching investigations into fee structures and service policies that disproportionately affected minority passengers. What had begun as one racist manager's personal bias had evolved into a fundamental reckoning with institutional discrimination across an entire industry. And at the center of it all was Marcus Rivera, a technology entrepreneur who had simply wanted to take his family on a vacation, but instead found himself leading a civil rights movement he never intended to start. 6 months after the Miami International Airport confrontation that changed everything, Marcus Rivera stood before a packed auditorium at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Representatives from every major news organization in America had gathered to hear his announcement about the most comprehensive airline industry reform in modern history. The Skyline Equal Access Protocol, as it would become known, was being implemented across all Skyline Airways operations immediately and would be offered as an open-source framework for adoption by other transportation companies worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. 6 months ago, my family and I experienced discrimination that revealed a hidden infrastructure of bias in commercial aviation. Today, I'm announcing measures that will ensure no family ever experiences what we experienced again. Behind him, a large screen displayed the key components of the reform package. Real-time bias monitoring using artificial intelligence systems. Mandatory demographic reporting of all customer service interactions. Independent oversight committees with civil rights organization representation. Victim compensation funds administered by third-party organizations. But most significantly, Marcus continued, we are implementing what we call the digital witness system. Every customer service interaction at every Skyline Airways countergate and aircraft will be recorded and analyzed by AI systems designed to detect patterns of discriminatory treatment. The system wasn't just about punishment, Marcus explained. It was designed to identify and correct bias before it escalated to the level of humiliation and theft that had characterized Brad Morrison's reign of terror. Dr. Sarah Kim Marcus's chief data analyst had spent months developing algorithms that could analyze voice tone, service timing, fee application patterns, and complaint resolution rates to identify when customer service representatives were treating passengers differently based on race, age, gender, or economic status. The technology was sophisticated enough to detect subtle forms of discrimination that might not be obvious to human supervisors, but comprehensive enough to provide training and feedback to employees before their unconscious biases became documented violations of civil rights. Elena Rodriguez, who had been promoted to Vice President of Customer Equity, stepped to the podium to explain the human element of the reforms. We're not just changing technology, she said. We're changing culture. Every Skyline Airways employee, from baggage handlers to corporate executives, will complete bias recognition training twice annually. More importantly, we're creating economic incentives for inclusive customer service. Employee bonuses and advancement opportunities would now be tied partially to customer satisfaction scores that were analyzed for demographic equity. Representatives who consistently provided excellent service to all passengers regardless of background would be rewarded. Those who showed patterns of discriminatory behavior would be retrained or terminated. The reforms had already produced measurable results. Customer satisfaction surveys showed significant improvements across all demographic categories. Complaint rates had dropped by 78%, but more importantly, complaint resolution rates had increased to nearly 100%. Passengers who filed discrimination reports were now receiving prompt responses, thorough investigations, and appropriate remedies. Most significantly, the company's financial performance had actually improved. Treating all customers with equal respect and professionalism had increased customer loyalty, reduced negative publicity, and eliminated the legal costs associated with documented civil rights violations. Marcus concluded his presentation with a personal reflection that would be quoted in business schools for decades. "When we started this process," he said, "people told me that comprehensive anti-discrimination measures would be expensive and complicated to implement. They were right about the complexity, but wrong about the cost. Discrimination was expensive. Bias was complicated. Treating people with dignity has actually been remarkably profitable." The press conference questions focused primarily on the broader implications of the Skyline Airways model for other industries. Would hotels adopt similar monitoring systems? Would car rental companies implement demographic equity reporting? Would cruise lines establish victim compensation funds? Marcus's answer was consistent across all industry inquiries. "We're making all our anti-discrimination technology available as open-source software," he said. "Any company can implement these systems for free. The only cost is the commitment to actually use the data to improve their treatment of all customers." Within 6 months of Marcus's press conference, 37 airlines had announced plans to adopt versions of the Skyline Equal Access Protocol. Hotel chains were piloting digital witness systems at their check-in counters. Cruise lines were implementing bias recognition training for their customer service staff. The transformation extended beyond corporate policy changes. Law schools were adding courses on technology-assisted civil rights enforcement. Business schools were teaching case studies about Marcus Rivera's approach to crisis management and social responsibility. Engineering schools were developing curriculum around AI systems designed to detect and prevent discrimination. But perhaps the most meaningful changes were happening at the individual level in airports and hotels and rental car lots across America, where customer service representatives were learning to see all customers as human beings deserving of respect, rather than categories to be profiled and processed. Maria Santos, now the station manager at Miami International Airport, had implemented weekly training sessions where employees reviewed customer interactions and discussed strategies for providing excellent service regardless of passenger demographics. The sessions had become so popular that representatives from other airlines were requesting permission to observe and learn. Jessica Martinez, promoted to assistant station manager, had developed a mentorship program pairing experienced representatives with new hires, focusing specifically on inclusive customer service techniques and unconscious bias recognition. The program was being adopted by Skyline Airways stations nationwide. The most dramatic transformation, however, was happening in the lives of Brad Morrison's former victims. The $50 million Victim Compensation Fund had processed over 3,000 claims providing financial remedies and formal apologies to passengers who had been targeted for discrimination and theft. But beyond the monetary compensation, many victims reported that the formal recognition of their experiences had provided psychological healing that was more valuable than the financial settlements. For years, they had been told their complaints about discriminatory treatment were isolated incidents or personal misunderstandings. Now they had official acknowledgement that they had been targeted as part of a documented pattern of institutional bias. Mrs. Jennifer Park, whose elderly mother had been humiliated by Brad Morrison, used her compensation to fund a scholarship program for Asian American students pursuing careers in hospitality management. Her goal was to diversify the industry's leadership and ensure that future generations of travelers would be served by representatives who understood the value of inclusive customer service. James Wright, whose teenage son had been subjected to discriminatory security screening, donated his settlement to civil rights organizations working on transportation equity issues. He had become an advocate for institutional change rather than individual punishment, echoing Marcus Rivera's philosophy that corporate change was more important than personal revenge. Maria Santos, the teacher from Phoenix who had missed her father's funeral due to Brad Morrison's fraudulent policies, used her compensation to establish a bereavement travel fund that helped low-income families attend important family events without facing discriminatory barriers or excessive fees. The victims had transformed their experiences of discrimination into forces for positive change, creating programs and organizations that would prevent future families from experiencing similar treatment. Meanwhile, Brad Morrison remained in federal prison serving a sentence of 12 years for civil rights violations, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. His appeals had been unsuccessful, and he faced additional civil lawsuits from victims seeking punitive damages beyond the compensation fund settlements. But even Brad's imprisonment had generated unexpected positive outcomes. He had become a case study in criminal justice reform programs focused on helping offenders understand the human impact of their crimes. His victim impact statements were used in bias recognition training programs to help customer service representatives understand how discriminatory behavior affected real families. In a strange twist of justice, Brad Morrison's crimes had become teaching tools that were helping prevent future incidents of discrimination across multiple industries. The congressional hearings that had been triggered by the Skyline Airways scandal had resulted in landmark civil rights legislation requiring federal contractors and regulated industries to maintain comprehensive anti-discrimination monitoring systems. The legislation known as the Digital Civil Rights Act established national standards for bias detection and prevention that extended far beyond transportation. Senator Patricia Hayes, who had witnessed the original confrontation at Miami International Airport, had become a leading advocate for technology-assisted civil rights enforcement. Her committee had worked with Marcus Rivera to develop federal standards for AI-powered discrimination detection that balanced privacy concerns with civil rights protection. The Federal Trade Commission had established new guidelines for customer service equity that required large corporations to demonstrate that their policies and practices did not disproportionately impact minority customers. Companies that failed to meet the guidelines faced significant financial penalties and federal oversight. Most importantly, the cultural shift that Marcus Rivera had accidentally triggered was becoming permanent. Customer service representatives across multiple industries were being trained to recognize that bias wasn't just morally wrong, it was economically stupid and legally dangerous. The Skyline Airways model had proven that treating all customers with equal dignity and respect wasn't just the right thing to do. It was also the smart thing to do from a business perspective. Companies that continued to tolerate discriminatory practices were finding themselves at competitive disadvantages as consumers increasingly chose to spend money with businesses that demonstrated genuine commitment to inclusive customer service. The market forces that had once rewarded discrimination were now punishing it, creating economic incentives for corporate behavior that supported civil rights rather than undermining them. As Marcus Rivera reflected on the 6 months since that confrontational morning at Miami International Airport, he realized that his family's experience had generated changes far beyond what he had originally envisioned. They had set out to take a vacation in Switzerland and had accidentally launched a civil rights movement that was transforming entire industries. The most satisfying outcome, however, was personal rather than political. Sophia Rivera, now 4 years old, was growing up in a world where her presence in first-class airline cabins would never be questioned. She would travel through airports where customer service representatives had been trained to treat all passengers with equal respect. She would stay in hotels where bias detection systems prevented discriminatory treatment. Marcus and Diana had used their unexpected platform to create a better world for their daughter and for millions of other families who deserved to travel with dignity rather than discrimination. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundation had been established for change that would outlast any individual leader or corporate executive. The technology, the policies, the legal framework, and most importantly, the cultural expectations had been permanently altered. Discrimination in customer service hadn't been eliminated, but it had become expensive, complicated, and legally dangerous for companies that chose to tolerate it, and that Marcus Rivera believed was how lasting change actually happened. Not through angry confrontations or political speeches, but through modifications to the incentive structures that shaped corporate behavior. He had learned that sometimes the most effective form of activism was simply holding companies accountable to their own stated values, while providing them with the tools and economic incentives to actually live up to those principles. The Miami International Airport confrontation had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had happened in corporate boardrooms and employee training centers, where decision-makers had realized that bias was bad for business and inclusive customer service was profitable for everyone. 2 years later, Sofia Rivera celebrated her 6th birthday aboard a Skyline Airways flight to London, where Marcus was scheduled to speak at an international conference on artificial intelligence and civil rights. The little girl who had slept peacefully through her parents' confrontation with documented discrimination was now old enough to understand that airplane travel should always involve kindness and respect. The captain personally welcomed the Rivera family aboard not because Marcus owned the airline, but because Skyline Airways had adopted a policy of treating every passenger like they were the most important person on the aircraft. The culture that Marcus had demanded through corporate ownership had become genuine hospitality that extended to all customers. Flight attendant Maria Santos, now a regional director for customer experience, stopped by their seats to chat with Sofia about her favorite books and her excitement about visiting London museums. The conversation was natural and warm, the kind of interaction that happened throughout Skyline Airways operations, because employees had been trained and incentivized to see passengers as individuals rather than revenue categories. Other airlines had adopted similar approaches. The Skyline Equal Access Protocol had become industry standard, implemented by carriers worldwide who recognized that inclusive customer service was both morally necessary and economically smart. Discrimination complaints across the aviation industry had dropped by 86% over 2 years. Hotel chains had implemented digital witness systems at their front desks. Car rental companies had established bias detection algorithms for their customer interactions. Cruise lines had created victim compensation funds for passengers who experienced discriminatory treatment. The transformation had extended beyond transportation. Retail stores were using AI monitoring to ensure equal service quality across all demographic groups. Restaurants were analyzing seating patterns and service timing to identify and correct unconscious bias in customer treatment. Brad Morrison had been released after serving 18 months of his sentence, his early release contingent on completing community service with civil rights organizations and participating in bias recognition programs for customer service workers. His criminal record made him unemployable in his former industry, but he had found work as a trainer helping other companies avoid the discriminatory practices that had destroyed his career. The irony was not lost on anyone involved that Brad Morrison was now teaching customer service representatives how to treat all passengers with equal dignity and respect. His victim impact statements had become powerful tools for helping employees understand how their unconscious biases could harm real families. Marcus Rivera continued to operate Skyline Airways as a profitable business that proved comprehensive anti-discrimination measures were compatible with financial success. Customer satisfaction had reached record levels. Employee retention had improved dramatically. Stock prices had consistently outperformed industry averages. But the most meaningful measure of success was simpler and more personal. Families like the Riveras could now travel anywhere in the world without fearing that their skin color, their clothing choices, or their accents would subject them to discriminatory treatment. Children like Sofia were growing up in a world where respect was the standard expectation rather than a privilege that had to be purchased with expensive clothes and deferential behavior. The confrontation at Miami International Airport had ended with handcuffs and criminal charges. But the legacy was measured in millions of dignified interactions between customer service representatives and passengers who were now seen as human beings, deserving of equal treatment rather than categories to be profiled and processed. Change doesn't happen when good people stay quiet. It happens when good people speak up. Stand up and refuse to accept discrimination as normal business practice. Sometimes justice arrives in handcuffs, but lasting transformation arrives through changes that make discrimination too expensive and too complicated for companies to tolerate. Marcus Rivera had learned that the most effective form of activism was creating economic incentives for corporate behavior that supported human dignity. He had discovered that sometimes buying an airline was less expensive than accepting institutional injustice. And Sofia Rivera was growing up in a world where her father's accidental civil rights movement had made travel safer, more dignified, and more inclusive for families everywhere who simply wanted to reach their destinations without having their humanity questioned along the way. Thank you for watching this story of instant accountability and corporate transformation. If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how they look or where they're traveling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that change is possible when people refuse to accept discrimination as normal. Drop a comment below about your own experiences with travel discrimination and let us know where you're watching from. Your stories matter, your voices matter, and together we can continue building a world where respect isn't a luxury purchase but a basic human right. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of justice and accountability. Until next time, travel with dignity, demand respect, and never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right. Thanks for being part of this community that believes in equality, justice, and treating every person with the dignity they deserve.